Who are we? Are you sure you want to know?
We're your friendly neighborhood podcast hosts, Sean
And Peter. Welcome to So Much to Tell, a Raimi Spider-Man podcast.
This is part 2 of our mighty mission into the mad mind of one Norman Osborn.
There's so much to tell about Norman. Specifically, so much Sean wanted to tell about Norman that we had to break it up into 2 big episodes. Last episode we covered the birth of the Goblin, how he went from being out of Oscorp to firing the board of directors, his objectivist philosophy, religious symbolism, and discussed his being an impressed father figure to Peter and a less than impressed father figure to Harry. Where do we go from here, Sean?
Let's talk about the offer, which is a number of different scenes, but let's just call it the offer, to make it easier to understand. It's the part of the movie where Norman, he sets out to capture Spider-Man, and he starts by going to the Daily Bugle because he knows that's where Spider-Man's pictures are appearing a lot of the time. And so he bursts into Jameson's office, makes that...
Jameson, you slime!
makes that unforgettable... greeting to him and demands to know where the pictures come from. And Jameson, to his credit, does not reveal that it's Peter Parker who gives them those pictures.
Yeah, good on him.
And exactly. So Jameson himself isn't as villainous as he appears to be either.
Just another businessman trying to make his way in the world however he can. He's, taking some risks here and there. Like, some food got poisoned. Like, I don't feel a little nauseous yet. But he definitely has respectable limits.
Yeah, exactly. So the Goblin attacks the Daily Bugle offices. He demands to know from Jameson where he's getting these pictures of Spider-Man so he can then track down Spider-Man. But then Spider-Man himself appears, and Jameson is, he feels like all of his suspicions have been confirmed, and then immediately says that he knew that Spider-Man and the Goblin had been in cahoots on this. Mm-hmm. And Spider-Man very memorably webs his mouth shut and asks him to let Mom and Dad talk for a while. And, of course, Norman, he responds with the sleeping potion and tells Spider-Man to sleep. Or more accurately, sleep.
There you go.
Spider-Man is overtaken by the sleeping gas, and Norman then captures him as he's falling from the sky, and they go over to a rooftop somewhere in New York, and the Goblin lays out his life philosophy, really, as we've talked about, objectivism, power is its own pursuit, and offers to have Spider-Man join him. And it's almost kind of similar to in Star Wars, whenever Darth Vader offers Luke Skywalker to join him and they can rule the galaxy as father and son. That's essentially what Norman is doing with Peter. He's saying, if you join me, we could have, you could have all this power to do whatever you wanted and we could do it together. I think we'd both benefit from this. And Peter, of course, says no, just as Luke Skywalker says no.
Yeah, well, it's very much like that. I mean, you said father and son, and Norman sees Peter as a son, an heir, and I know, of course, at this point, Goblin and doesn't know that Spider-Man's Peter, but it's the same principle. And it's also sort of like a business deal here as well. Like, Goblin is the quintessential business person villain. Everything he does about the pursuit of power, extreme, might be fair to say, corrupted version of Randian objectivism, and he sort of puts this forward as a business proposal for Peter. And he lays out his personal philosophy that, there's 8 million people in this city, and those teeming masses exist for the sole purpose of lifting the few exceptional people onto their shoulders. And that's how he sees people. They're a means to an end.
They're just faceless.
Like a business person.
Yeah.
They're the people that make me money. They're the people that give me power. Of course, for Peter, those teeming masses are... unfortunately for him, the only reason he exists. He exists to lift up those people in their time of need, whereas Goblin is a complete opposite. And so I think it's really interesting that he approaches it in the same way that he would approach any other sort of business merger or business decision.
Well, the video game tie-in makes that business allusion there very explicit because there's a level in the video game called The Offer, and it's clearly at that part of the movie where Norman is propositioning Peter to join him as an associate. So again, they're clearly going for that sort of, I'm trying to make a deal with you here. Let's make a deal.
And he's got some points.
Or at least he makes a good argument during that conversation where he says, in spite of everything you do, eventually they will grow to hate you. And we see that, in no small part due to the efforts of the Daily Bugle and its bombastic editor, Mr. Jameson, to turn the population against Spider-Man. I mean, and I think Norman has a point there that, like, no matter how many good things you do for these people of New York, eventually they're either going to lose interest or they're just not going to like you anyway. So what's the point? Why even try?
Well, heck, I mean, Norman's experienced that himself with his own board. The funding.
Exactly. It's like he spent.
I guess his wife even apparently
Exactly.
became a pack of ravening wolves on his trust fund at some point. So, he's experienced that, and we've seen him experience that. So, again, we see where he's coming from. Why help anyone except yourself?
And that's what I mean. Like, it's not a bad argument that, like, no matter what, like, eventually they're not going to appreciate you for it. So what's the point? Why try? It's much easier to look after yourself because you'll never be disappointed like that.
Yeah, because I don't know much about Ayn Rand's philosophy, and I hope one of the things I do know is how to pronounce her name correctly. I think I got that. But I do know that her and Uncle Ben would not get along very well at all.
Oh, not at all.
Because Uncle Ben's whole thing is, if you have the power, you have to help people. You are duty bound to assist others who need it. And Ayn Rand is absolutely not about that. Why bother? You're your own end in yourself. Focus on yourself. If you want to help others, I guess you could, but there's no benefit unless you want to. And we see in the movie for Peter, there is absolutely no benefit to him for it. He's the only one that doesn't benefit from his powers. Whereas everything Norman does is for his own benefit. Peter doesn't get anything out of it. So really, it would be very easy for Peter to fall into that because he does suffer so much from it, his self-sacrifice.
Well, that whole idea is certainly comes back in the other two movies of Peter. It definitely hurts him inside that he's not appreciated by the people of New York for all of his effort. I think that certainly is something that eats away at him for a while. And then we see in the third movie how when that goes too far the other way, how that's not good for him either. But there's definitely people that are appreciative of his efforts, but there's a lot who aren't. And it certainly doesn't help whenever, like, you have the newspapers that are against you, and you also have the police department that's against you.
Yeah.
Those are two, key constituencies in New York right there. So, like, even if you do have a good number of fans already, there's still some pretty powerful forces that are lined up against you, and that has to hurt. That has to really make you question what you're doing.
Yeah. And to Peter's credit, he stands against it really well in the first one. But yeah, it definitely eats at him progressively through the series.
And Norman, just for his part, he bypasses that and says, whatever I do, it's only for me. It's only for my benefit. So to heck with everybody else. If people have to die or whatever, that's unfortunate, but so be it.
It's also sort of interesting, too. Norman has all of these reasons, and really all Peter can offer for his reasoning is because it's right, which is interesting. Peter clings to this sort of like base truth and reason that this is what it is, and helping other people is right, which is, in some sense, that's an objectivist sort of thing, that there is one way, A is A. This is what it is. Into Peter's reasoning, this is right. Of course, to Norman's, it's pathetically predictable. But, Norman has like a big spiel to give, backing him up. And Peter could almost seem a little tenuous in some ways. He doesn't have a lot to back him up necessarily. Of course, he's also been drugged. So there's that. But,
well, Peter is clearly not like a nihilist or anybody else that thinks there's nothing objective. And I know this is confusing with the term objectivism, but I think, what Peter seems to subscribe to is a view that there is objective morality in the sense that there are things that are inherently good and inherently evil in the universe. And a lot of people would say, well, that's because that's what, God, for example, is who decides what is objectively good and evil, whatever the source is. Peter seems to subscribe to this idea that there are things that are always good and things that are always evil. And in his worldview, you have to choose the side of what is always good.
Yeah, and I will say, this is a conversation for another episode, but this does come back to bite Peter in Spider-Man 3.
Exactly.
The idea that people are either good or evil. So, Peter definitely has a lot to learn yet.
Well, that's what I mean. He sees the world in a very black and white way. There's...
Which objectivists do. And that's what's interesting. There's definitely some objectivist qualities to Peter. Like, when he says, I want to earn what I make myself. Norman respects that. That's definitely coming at like a self-made man sort of perspective.
Exactly.
So there are some elements of him that appeal to Norman. And Norman wants to try to bend Peter the rest of the way to his side.
Oh, exactly. There's definitely a lot of moments in this movie where Peter could have made a choice. And a lot of this is about choice.
Yep.
Again, Goblin says that line, we are who we choose to be. This is all about choice. And Peter, sometimes he makes the very wrong choice. And we saw that when he could have stopped the robber, but he didn't. And as a result, his uncle was murdered. But later on in that movie, he makes the right decision.
Yeah.
So, so you have the rooftop offer there between the Green Goblin and Spider-Man, where, the Green Goblin propositions him to join him in this destructive effort. There's no denying that the regular forces of society would have a hard time standing up to the combined forces of the Green Goblin and Spider-Man.
They're exceptional.
And Spider-Man, I don't think he mulls over the offer seriously at all.
No.
And the next time we see them together is at a house fire. Spider-Man, saves a young baby from a house fire, and then he goes back in when he hears what seems to be an old woman screaming in terror as the slowly encroaching flames threaten to overwhelm her. Spider-Man goes back into the building because, again, it's right, as he would think it.
Yeah.
And he goes back in to try to save this woman, and he sees what appears to be an old woman in a shawl screaming hysterically at the raging inferno. And it turns out to be the Green Goblin playing a little bit of a trick on him. And this is one of my favorite quotes of the movie. I've always loved it because it's just so awkwardly brilliant. Spider-Man finds out that it's the Goblin, and the Goblin says, "What about my generous proposal? Are you in or are you out?" And all the while, he knows that Spider-Man has decided against it, and he's clutching a pumpkin bomb that is clearly primed to explode in a few seconds here. Spider-Man provides the most brilliant response that I've ever heard. "It's you who's out, Gobby. Out of your mind." And again, and this is an example of Spider-Man being pathetically predictable to him, but Goblin was clearly prepared, and so he says wrong answer, and then, throws this pumpkin bomb at him.
Well, and then just to dwell on that exchange for a moment.
Sure.
That's a great point that you make, that, as pathetically predictable as Peter is, Norman A finds a way to draw him out. Like, he knows he's going to be there trying to do something that he thinks is right for other people. And B, he has the strong suspicion that Peter is not going to go for it. And so he's primed and ready to blow him out of the sky, blow the competition. And again, he poses it as a generous business proposal. And then, of course, Peter
What about
doesn't
my
quite...
generous proposal?
And then Peter doesn't quite realize what he's doing, but he accidentally taps into, kind of hits a nerve for Norman, where he says, "It's you who's out." Being the second person in this movie to tell Norman he's out of something. And we know that never sits well with old Normie. Now, you were saying.
So yes, Spider-Man and the Goblin engage in a little bit of hand-to-hand combat in the burning building here. Perhaps it's meant to symbolize the raging fire inside of Peter for the raging battle, I should say, inside of himself over what kind of person he wants to be. But at least at this point, he has made the right choice.
Interesting.
I don't know if there's too much to that or not, but certainly...
Hey, it is if we say it is. That's what interpretation's all about.
And again, it shows you that the Green Goblin is clearly better at hand-to-hand combat, and he pretty well dominates Spider-Man during their brief little fight here. And he tries to finish him off with some razor bats, these little drone-like things that have these really sharp wings. And notably, and this is a key plot point, Spider-Man is cut on his left arm with one of those things. Clearly not like a fatal wound, but certainly it's pretty bad. And Spider-Man leaves that fight, and evidently it's Thanksgiving Day, when this fire happens. And do you think that Norman set that fire intentionally, like to try to entrap Spider-Man? Like, because how else would he
be there? Is he just cruising around the city looking for a fire?
That's what I mean. Like, is he like Peter, where he listens to the police scanner to try to find emergencies?
Doubtful. Yeah, I gotta think he probably said it. That's a good point.
But you have to imagine, in a city like New York, there's a lot of fires on any given day, and what makes you think that Spider-Man would come to any of them?
Like a moth to the flame. Well, I mean, for all we know, Norman's been setting fire after fire throughout the city, just waiting for Peter to show up to one of them.
So in addition to being a bomber, he's also an arsonist, most likely.
I'm calling it. Yeah, I think you're right.
Which furthermore underscores, like you mentioned earlier, that he's meant to represent the devil.
Yeah.
Well, what do we think about when we think of the devil? We think of hell, flames.
Good point.
And certainly if he's lighting fires,
they do sort of meet in this inferno setting. And then even at the end of the scene, stylistically, the fire sort of overwhelms the Goblin and the screen, and then transitions him from that scene to the Thanksgiving scene.
Just goes to show you that, how little regard he has for the, quote, teeming masses, because you think about it, this fire clearly took place on Thanksgiving Day, which is already a very crazy day for New York City when they have that massive, Macy's Thanksgiving parade. Norman clearly didn't care that this was going on and would be tying up the New York Fire Department and Police Department.
Yeah, I guess he couldn't care less about Thanksgiving. How dastardly is the Goblin?
That's what I'm saying. Like, the more you think about it, This is premeditated on the part of the Goblin to trick Spider-Man into responding to a fire on a holiday where the emergency services are going to be tied up with the Thanksgiving parade.
But now, the real question now is, do you think he picked up the fruitcake before or after he set the fire?
Good question. Probably after.
I mean, he could have set the fire and let it stoke for a little while and then ran out to get the fruitcake while the fire was sort of building and then came back in time for Spider-Man to show up. Potentially, because he's got to wait for the fire to spread a little bit.
Oh, yeah. I mean, certainly this fire was very devastating. It was bad enough that the fire department didn't even appear to be going into the building anymore.
Right.
And so they have that little meeting in the burning building, and next we see them is at Thanksgiving dinner, and we see Norman coming up in the elevator, and he's clearly still a little bit out of it from his fight with Spider-Man. He's clearly trying to regain his composure before going into dinner here. And he makes a very witty, albeit ominous comment when he comes in by saying, "Work was murder."
And as a matter of fact, I mean, that sort of would be reinforced if indeed he set that fire intentionally.
The movie doesn't tell us, but there very well could have been fatalities in that fire.
Hmm.
I mean, for all we know, there could have been an old woman in there that he murdered and then pretended to be her so that the other people outside wouldn't be thrown off by it. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past him. I really wouldn't.
No, I wouldn't put it past Norman. Storm and Norman.
Storm and Norman, which, by the way, is another military reference because Storm and Norman was the nickname of General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was the leader of the U.S. forces during Desert Storm in 1991. So yet another allusion to his connection.
Yeah, that one I knew. Well, that's not entirely true. I knew it was something had to do with the military. But I'm sorry, another allusion?
Well, just another allusion to the deep involvement between the military and this technology and this human performance enhancer that have really turned Norman Osborn's life upside down.
Yeah.
And unleashed these very destructive forces that were always kind of brewing within him.
Yeah. Well, so then we return to the greatest Thanksgiving scene in all of cinema.
Yes, exactly. And, Norman shows up. He seems to regain his composure a little bit. He makes some small talk with everybody. He finally meets Mary Jane for the first time as Norman, because we glossed over that, but he does see her at the Unity Day festival, but she doesn't know that it's Norman at that point. So she finally meets him as Norman, as Harry's father, for the first time. And everything seems to be going okay at first. It seems a little bit awkward, but, first meetings with your significant other's parents usually are. There's always going to be a little bit of awkwardness.
Well, maybe a little more than awkwardness, though. I mean, Norman holds a gaze of Mary Jane for slightly longer than one would expect. There's more than a hint of licentiousness with Norman.
True.
MJ.
Yeah, that's true. That is
coming
that's
off
true.
of his whole "hello, my dear" earlier.
That's
and
true.
we don't know much about Norman's wife, but when you see the picture of her, I mean, I presume that's his wife in the portrait. I think she is a redheaded woman in a black dress. So I don't know if there's some sort of connection there.
That's very I think that's very possible that he's probably looking at her and seeing like a younger version of his wife and is clearly interested in her in a very untoward way.
Yeah, I think we can definitely say that. Yeah. So but
he-
in other words, just your average awkward Thanksgiving dinner with the family.
And Peter is also running late, and we see him enter a few moments later, just as dinner is about to be served. So they sit down to dinner, and Norman sits at the head of the table as, again, the symbolic father of the family. And Aunt May asks him to carve the turkey, as you do the father at Thanksgiving dinner.
Very Norman Rockwell.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, Norman Rockwell. Interesting.
Norman Osborn Rockwell.
And of course, we all know that famous painting of Thanksgiving dinner from Norman Rockwell. And, Aunt May gives him the knife and the carving fork to start slicing the turkey. Only after she slaps his hand as he's about to take a little bite of stuffing before they say grace. And, you can see the seething anger and humiliation in his eyes there as he is aghast that Aunt May would chastise him so publicly.
Mm-hmm.
And he looks at her with this so much evil, but Aunt May doesn't know that. She still sees him as just Mr. Osborn, the father of Peter's best friend. So she has no idea what's bubbling under the surface there, but we do. We, the audience, know very well what he's thinking in that moment.
Yeah, I think he's just holding it back. I don't know if he's trying to hold the goblin back in that moment. I don't know what's going on.
It's very scary.
I mean, he could snap at any moment, it looks like.
It does. It's very uncomfortable, especially when he's sharpening the knife. He's sharpening it.
Yeah.
And you don't know if he's going to stab Aunt May or if he's going to stab the turkey.
It's interesting to note, too, just, we talked about his whole, why he would never have a come to Jesus moment. And that's sort of apparent here, even in this small little scene. I mean, he wants a piece of turkey, and he's going to take it because why not? He deserves it. He wants it. He should take it. Whereas Aunt May, there's something else out there that matters for her first. We're going to do this together as a family. We're going to pray first. There's more considerations to her beyond herself.
That's
But
true.
Norman is God to himself. Why would he pray? Why would he wait for anyone else?
Exactly. And well, Aunt May says, like, this is the first Thanksgiving in this apartment and we are going to do things properly.
Right.
And she says it like with an air of like this stern but loving kind of grandmother or maternal figure that is going to make sure that her family does it the right way, that she's looking out for their moral fiber.
Yeah.
We're not going to eat until we've given thanks to the Almighty for bestowing this generous bounty upon us. Whereas Norman, no, who cares? Like, let's just eat. What are we waiting for? It doesn't matter.
Right. Another great little, character moment right there, between the two of them.
For what it's worth, Norman doesn't let Aunt May's little hand touch stop him, because even after she reproaches him, he still eats the stuffing.
Right.
He still eats it, and he eats it with this smirk of devilish glee.
Yeah.
I mean, he clearly enjoys the fact that he's going against this proper way of doing things, quote unquote.
And I have to wonder how that scene would have played out if he hadn't noticed what he notices a moment later. Or what Aunt May notices.
Oh, yeah. So Aunt May notices that Peter's arm seems to be bleeding. And sure enough, she rolls up his sleeve, and there's this giant, nasty-looking gash that's just oozing bright red blood. And, of course, Aunt May is concerned and asks Peter where he got this wound. And Peter responds that, it was a bike messenger. They clipped me and knocked me down when I was getting this can of cranberry sauce. And so Norman he must have been very observant during that fight, because he must have seen where the razorback grazed Spider-Man's left arm.
Yeah.
And, how could I forget? Like, there's the part where they go up into Peter's bedroom looking for him, and Norman smells the fresh blood, or he hears it and smells it. You can see his nose kind of jiggle up and down a little bit as he smells this fresh blood. So he knows something inside of it.
He doesn't hear Peter skittering across his ceiling and then leaping out underneath the balcony. Which, incidentally, is a nod to issue number 14 of Amazing Spider-Man, his first appearance. I think, anyway.
Did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, on the cover, the Goblin's there, and Peter's, like, hanging upside down from the ceiling in a very similar way to what you see him do in that moment. So, neat little nod to the first appearance of the Goblin.
That's interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, so we have the
it's
first
almost like it's almost kind of shark-like. I just want to say that it's almost kind of shark-like in the way that he smells that blood, and he's just immediately
very predatory.
Like something is aroused in him. Like, he smells that blood and immediately starts scanning and searching for, like you said, his prey. It's very predatory.
And interestingly, we've already seen now the Goblin has become disenchanted with Spider-Man. He's kind of given up on him at this point. And we see this moment, too, where Norman is also kind of disappointed in Peter. He's like a bit of a slob, isn't he?
That's true.
So at the same time that Spider-Man is falling out of favor with the Goblin, Peter also happens to be falling out of favor with Norman. And maybe that's part of why he's so suspicious. He's starting to feel like maybe Peter isn't everything he believed he was. And so he is a little bit on edge, and it really stands out to him when Peter is
very well could be
more suspicious.
He does seem a bit taken aback by the mess in Peter's bedroom there.
Yeah.
But Aunt May famously says, well, all brilliant men are slobs.
She's the best. Yeah.
Don't let the mess distract you or take away from who he really is, which is that he's a genius.
Don't judge a book by its disgusting mess it leaves.
Exactly.
In its room.
Exactly.
I mean, that quote for me has justified many messy room over the years, including our shared messy room in college.
Exactly. Yes.
I think we appealed to Aunt May's wisdom on that front a number of times.
I mean, to be fair, to be fair to Peter, like, a messy room really, I mean, yeah, it's annoying, but come on, like, if you're trying to curry favor with somebody as like a father-son sort of relationship, I don't think a messy room is necessarily a deal breaker, but for Norman, maybe it is. Maybe he sees it as part of this larger worldview. I don't know.
Apparently so.
So anyway,
back to dinner.
Yeah, so we get back to dinner, and Norman notices the wound, and he immediately makes the connection that is the exact same arm that was wounded in my fight with Spider-Man. And Norman puts two and two together and just abruptly gets up and leaves dinner. And Harry is understandably upset about this. And Harry notes that he set up Thanksgiving dinner explicitly as a vehicle for Norman to meet his girlfriend, Mary Jane.
Yeah, and Harry and MJ went the extra mile on this one, too, because back at the Unity Day festival, he's disappointed that MJ didn't wear the black dress to impress his father. And, come Thanksgiving, she does wear the black dress to try to impress Norman.
You're right.
Enjoy the fruitcake.
So Norman immediately gets up to leave, and Harry follows him into the hallway as Norman is bolting for the elevator, and they have a very tense, heated conversation. And Norman more or less gives Harry his assessment of Mary Jane, which is that, yeah, she's pretty, but she's really only with you because of your money. So make good use of her and then discard her, because otherwise, you're just going to harm yourself. Which, again, lines up very well with his whole philosophy on life.
Using people. Yeah.
Use people and then dump them. If they're not of use to you, what's the point? Why, extend yourself for them?
Yeah.
Of course, the door is open and they're having a very loud conversation, so everybody in the apartment overhears this. And Mary Jane is, understandably, again, upset that Harry didn't defend her. And interestingly, Harry chooses his father over Mary Jane.
Yeah.
And gets mad at Mary Jane for criticizing his father.
It means that much to him.
Yeah. Even though Harry clearly is not all that close to his father, he still chooses his father over Mary Jane.
He wants to be.
Yeah. He wants to be close to Norman.
And in some ways, as much as he loves MJ, I do believe that he really cares for MJ,
Yeah.
Certainly more than Flash Thompson did.
Sure.
But, in some ways, everything Harry does is a means to try to impress his father, to win his father's love. And that's part of what fuels his obsession in Spider-Man 2, up to his twisted worldview by the time of Spider-Man 3, into becoming another Goblin to try to impress his father in some ways, to avenge his father's honor.
Yeah.
But even here, we see that he's sort of using MJ as a tool to impress his father.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, yeah, you're right. I think he does care for Mary Jane as a girlfriend, but certainly I think he's also using her with ulterior motives of trying to get into his father's good graces by essentially dating I guess almost like a doppelganger of his mother and Norman's wife. So
possibly. There might be something to that, yeah. Your mother was beautiful, too. They're all beautiful until they're snarling after your trust fund like a pack of ravening wolves.
Almost like an Oedipus complex or something with Harry. He's dating somebody who clearly resembles his mother. So
Possibly.
Yeah.
I think there's something to that. I don't know if we need to dig too deeply into Harry's psyche with the Oedipal thing. But there's definitely something there with the Goblin, though, I think, between some sort of weird connection between MJ and his wife.
Well, at the end of the day, this all is an outgrowth of very, very bad family dynamics in the Osborn household. There was not a lot of love shown between Norman and his wife, between Norman and Harry, and as a result, a lot of people suffer. That's what this all comes down to. It comes down to a very difficult household for the Osborns.
No doubt.
And so anyway, Mary Jane storms out after Harry's abject failure to stand up and defend her honor, and Harry shouts at her,
Harry Osborn,
which really upsets Aunt May that he could yell at her for something like that. And Thanksgiving dinner is ruined, as so many of them are every single year for very similar reasons. I mean, let's face it, Thanksgiving dinner can be awkward under the best of circumstances, and no doubt this was an extremely poor set of circumstances to have a Thanksgiving dinner. So anyway, next time we see Norman, he's at his mansion again. He's doubled over crying because he knows what he has to do to defeat Spider-Man, but the good side of him, to the extent that there was a good side of him, is trying like hell to hold on to what's left of that, because the Goblin is telling him, and this is clearly some sort of conversation in his own mind, the Goblin is telling him that he has to go after the Heart, Peter's family, his family and friends, the people he loves. The old method that is in Sun Tzu's Art of War, or as the Goblin puts it, the cunning warrior attacks neither body nor mind. And as we see Norman, he's hunched over, he's crying, he's upset. We actually see him very conflicted about what he has to do, because he keeps saying, I can't do this.
Perhaps at his lowest. That is perhaps his weakest, most vulnerable, most, like you said, conflicted here. Yeah.
He's very conflicted about what he has to do.
He knows what he has to do, but he doesn't know if he has the strength to do it.
Exactly. That was as it was put by another morally ambiguous character in another franchise, Kylo Ren.
Mm-hmm. Because there is definitely, like you said, a part of him, the good part of him, insofar as there ever was one, doesn't want to have to kill Peter. He still sees Peter as sort of a son figure to him.
He's conflicted, but ultimately,
he gives in to the Goblin.
Ultimately, he figures out what he has to do.
Give in to the Goblin.
He does. He chooses. And next thing we see is Aunt May praying the Lord's Prayer. And again, this goes back to that devilish
motif.
In the devil incarnate sort of interpretation of the Green Goblin. And just as Aunt May is finishing up the Lord's Prayer over Uncle Ben's picture, she's about to say, deliver us from evil, the Green Goblin makes another fiery entrance, destroys her wall, and obviously could hear what kind of prayer she was saying, because he demands that she finish the prayer. Finish it! Finish it! and just crying out of the sheer terror of what she's experiencing, Aunt May just sobs and says, "From evil."
Just like that. That was a spot on Rosemary Harris, Sean.
From evil.
But again, a fascinating moment where, again, there's no higher power than himself, and he seeks to prove that in this moment. You're bothering to pray to God to protect you from evil. Well, let's see him stop me. So he's defying God himself in this moment. That there's nothing greater than me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's some pretty intense stuff.
Exactly. You're right, because she's saying, "Deliver us from evil," and then right on cue, evil incarnate smashes through her window and mocks her for saying that. He mocks her for making that prayer, for making that plea to God, because he's evil and he's right there. And so obviously Aunt May was not delivered from evil as far as he can see it.
Yeah.
And the next thing we cut to is the hospital, where Aunt May is recovering from that horrific attack.
Those
all
eyes.
she can say is,
"Oh, sorry."
"Those eyes." Yeah, like those eyes, those horrible yellow eyes. And Peter has his little epiphany and realizes, the Goblin knows who I am. My friends and family aren't safe. He's going to attack them to get to me.
And yet Peter still hasn't put it together yet. We had a really awkward, Norman ducked out all of a sudden, apparently because of the scratch on Peter's arm, and Peter doesn't quite put it together yet. At all.
Yeah, you're right. He doesn't know that it's Mr. Osborn at this point, but what he does know is bad enough, and that's the Green Goblin is aware of his alter ego and is coming after his friends and family one by one to try to get to him. And that has to be horrifying. That realization must have just made him sick to his stomach.
Well, no doubt. And it's part of what will help Peter realize later that no matter what he does, it's always going to be the one he loves that get hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say that later on, that's what pushes him away from Mary Jane.
Yeah.
So Peter's at the hospital with Aunt May as she's recovering from the Goblin's attack. And Aunt May makes a very pointed observation that everybody knows how you feel about Mary Jane. Meaning that everybody knows that you have a big crush on her, which Norman found out himself through a conversation with Harry, where Harry revealed that Peter had been in love with Mary Jane since the 4th grade.
Yeah, there's no one Peter cares for more.
Exactly. It was pretty well known and had been so for years.
I think we deserve to talk a little bit about the interesting exchange that Harry and Norman have.
Yes, yeah, I did kind of gloss over that a little bit. That is an interesting conversation.
Yeah, like for the first time in this movie, Norman treats his son like a son.
You're right, because that's really the first heartfelt conversation they have in those movies. And that conversation itself happens because Peter and Mary Jane are together at the hospital, and Peter goes on that very notable soliloquy to Mary Jane about what his love for her does to him. And Harry walks in there as Peter and Mary Jane are holding hands. And Harry, understandably, is a little bit let down by that. He's a little upset that his girlfriend is having a pretty significant moment with his best friend. Any guy in that situation would be understandably upset.
You feel for him. Again, like you said, there's a lot of sympathy for people in this movie.
Exactly. You kind of understand why Harry's a little bit upset about that. Harry doesn't let that go, by the way. He does not let that go. That is yet another reason for him to have this anger for the next 2 movies. But anyway, he's a little bit crestfallen after seeing Peter and Mary Jane have that moment in the hospital. And so he's talking to Norman about it. We see them, you're right, we see them have for the first time in this movie, they have a very heartfelt conversation where Norman actually admits that he was not a good father. He actually tells Harry, "I should have been there for you, but I wasn't, and I'm sorry. I let you down. As a father, I have failed you." And that's pretty significant. That's a significant thing for anybody to say, let alone somebody as narcissistic and psychopathic as the Green Goblin.
However,
yeah,
like good on Norman on the one hand for finally treating his son like a son. And like you can see how that impacts Harry. And of course that leaves a lasting impression, once his father's dead, that being their last exchange. Not only did he lose a lot, did he lose the chance of ever connecting with his father, but they were just starting to get somewhere when he's stolen from him. However, from Norman's perspective, I think that's got to be mainly because he had 2 sons. One of them betrayed him. And so, then the only one that was quote unquote still loyal to him then became the favored son. In that moment with Peter gone as his son, all he has is Harry, and he's seeing Harry in this new light and appreciating his loyalty more than he did before. So there's definitely a darker aspect to it.
Oh, absolutely.
But it is interesting to see him, approaching him in this fatherly way, and he's going to rectify certain iniquities. So in a sense, maybe part of what he's doing to go kill Spider-Man is for Harry. Might be a bit of a stretch. Maybe that's just what he's telling himself. I don't know.
I think that's more likely. I think it's that he's just trying to justify it in his own mind. He's trying to rationalize it by saying that, oh, I'm just getting revenge for, what happened between Mary Jane and Peter. But certainly, in any event, it's extreme for him to try to murder her just because Harry's feelings were a little bit hurt.
It's a little extreme, yeah.
It's a little extreme. It's kind of...
Yeah, I gotta agree. A bit extreme.
So yeah, that's an interesting conversation that Harry and Norman have. And Harry, he tries to make Norman feel better by saying, oh, well, you're a busy man. You're very important. I understand why you weren't really around that much. And Norman, again says, well, that's no excuse. I should have been there for you as a father. I wasn't, but I'm going to do better now. I'm going to, as you said, rectify certain inequities. And boy, does he ever, or at least does he ever try. And so anyway, it's during that conversation where Harry reveals the depth of Peter's devotion to Mary Jane, that Peter's loved her for years, and it's at that moment that he realizes that she needs to be the next target.
Yeah.
And then Peter puts two and two together when Aunt May makes that observation to him, and he realizes that, oh no, Mary Jane's probably next. And he runs out to try to call her on the payphone, which is a very 2002 sort of thing to happen, by the way. And he gets her answering machine, and he's begging her to call him immediately, and then the Green Goblin cuts in and says, "Can Spider-Man come out to play?"
Again, that was a pretty good Willem Dafoe right there, Sean.
Well, he just
spot on.
It's almost just hilarious how I don't know. It's like he's taunting him, but like in such an over the top way. Can Spider-Man come out to play?
He says it in such a notable way, yeah. But while we're on the subject of coming out to play, and before we commence with discussing Spidey and Gobby's final confrontation, it's time to play Brilliant or Lazy.
Okay.
Perhaps I'll
you can
kick it off here, Sean.
Yep, you go first this time.
All right. Regarding Oscorp's procedure for the human performance enhancers, what is the promachloroperazine for? Would you like multiple choice?
I believe it increases the rate of absorption.
I'm gonna give you multiple choice. That's
Okay.
what I'm gonna do. Okay. A, B, C, and D. A, it fundamentally alters the DNA. B, it reverses the polarity of the neutron flow. C, it begins catalyzation when the vapor hits the bloodstream.
Oh,
D, it isolates recombinant DNA to activate.
Oh, it's
positional genes.
definitely C. It's definitely C.
Yeah, it's C. You got it. Yeah, you were close. You were close with your guess. I mean, you practically had it, but I was going for exactness.
That's
so
fair.
Well done. Brilliant.
Well, we'll give me half credit. We'll say half brilliant. So average.
I think Dr. Connors would pass you.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Okay, Peter. Here's your question.
Oh boy.
Name all of the weapons that Green Goblin uses during the movie, aside from hand-to-hand combat. And just to clarify, I am not counting the glider as a sole weapon. In other words, I'm looking for weapons that were part of the glider, some weapons that were not part of the glider. I'm looking for you to name all of the weapons that we see him use during the course of the movie.
Jeez Louise. Okay. Well, let's see here now. Can I get multiple choice?
I don't think I could give you multiple choice.
I'm just kidding. I wouldn't think so. Okay. Well, we got to start with my favorite, the Trident.
Okay. That's one.
The Trident he pulls from somewhere. The sleeping gas.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep.
Okay.
Love that. Okay.
I was hoping you would say that one. That's I love that line.
I love it too. There's like the bayonet sort of knives that shoot out from it.
Okay, that's three. You're doing
gun.
good here. You are hitting them all. Like, good job.
Well,
Keep going.
I'm something of a Spider-Man fan myself. I have seen these movies a couple of times. The machine gun. Got that.
You are. Yep. You are 4 for 6. There's 2 more that I have on my list. So if you get both of these, you'll be brilliant.
Well, I mean, I guess they're two different things. We got pumpkin bombs. We got razor bats.
You got it. You got all 6. Congratulations.
Woo! Brilliant. We're both brilliant this round.
Like, I mean, I hope I'm not forgetting one, but those are the 6 that I could think of.
That's all that comes to my mind, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to learn there was more up his sleeve, but I think that's all we see. So yeah, I'm going to say we did it. I'm going to say we got it.
I was hoping that I would trip you up with the trident because it like he pulls out the trident right before we see the bayonet, and I was hoping that would. I was hoping I would trick you there, but I didn't.
I know. I love that trident.
All right, yeah, good job. You got all 6 of them.
All right. Well, Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. All right, good on us. Back to where we were. Uh, Norman had just called Spider-Man out to play.
So next thing we cut to is Spider-Man meeting Norman on, I think it's the Queensboro Bridge.
I think you're right.
Spider-Man swings to the bridge and sees Norman holding Mary Jane in one hand and the cable of a tramway in the other, on which is a cable car full of little children on a field trip to somewhere, I believe Roosevelt Island.
A pretty late field trip, I have to say.
Yeah, because it's like in the middle of the night, because Mary Jane's in her pajamas. So you're
Yeah.
right. You have to wonder, why is a group of school children out on a field trip in the middle of the night? But
I guess it's an overnight field trip, I guess.
I suppose. But
Mm-mm.
so Peter gets there and he says, this is why you shouldn't be a hero, because at some point, some sadistic lunatic is going to come along and force you to make a decision where no matter what you do, somebody dies. And I am that lunatic right now, and I am forcing you to make that decision. What's it going to be, Spider-Man? Let die the woman you love, or suffer the little children, which that is another biblical reference to the New Testament, one of the Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
So again, underscoring this idea that the Goblin is representing a biblical sort of evil, the devil incarnate.
Yeah.
So Peter says, don't do it, Goblin. And the Goblin comes back at him with that famous
We
line.
are who we choose to be. Now choose. Yeah, again, a very objectivist sort of thing.
It is. It is. And Spider-Man tries to have the best of both worlds, and he somehow manages it, barely by the skin of his teeth.
Which is Peter's whole MO. I mean, that's all he can do. He balances everything only to the detriment of himself.
Yeah, because he's quite literally caught in the middle there. He's
Yeah.
bridging the gap between this very heavy cable car and Mary Jane. He's trying to hold them both up while they're waiting for the barge, this fortuitously placed barge, to come underneath them to catch them.
Right. And notably, he can't do it alone. Everyone needs help sometimes, even Spider-Man. He relies on the altruism of others.
You're right. That's a really good point, because if not for that barge, I mean, at least one of those two things, Mary Jane or the school children would have been harmed, if not killed. So certainly you're right. I feel like, the barge operator doesn't get enough praise.
Yeah. Well, between the barge and the people on the bridge, Norman sees his ideologies come into conflict with altruism from Peter and the good people of New York. It's a moment that sort of shows, well, maybe Norman wasn't quite right about what real power is.
It kind of calls back in a way to the earlier conversation where Norman says that the people of New York will eventually hate you. Well, this is the people of New York literally coming together to save Spider-Man, to help him in the most important and significant way. They are coming together to intervene on his side during this battle with the Green Goblin. So they are absolutely showing their appreciation for him by helping him out.
Yeah.
So it's another way that the people of New York sort of refute, at least temporarily, they refute the Green Goblin's whole worldview.
Yeah.
So luckily the barge is able to come underneath the cable car there, and Spider-Man can set it down. He's gonna make it. But only because of the intervention of the people of New York on the bridge. They begin to bombard the Goblin with rocks and debris from the bridge. They just begin to pelt him with whatever they have on hand. And that's enough. That's just enough. It's just enough to turn the tide of the battle and give Peter a little more time to make sure that he can get the other people to safety before taking on Goblin himself.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's cheering that the Goblin's scheme has been foiled until he flies into Spider-Man, and by sheer force, they fly to this abandoned building for their climactic mano-a-mano showdown.
Just as an interesting bit of trivia, Roosevelt Island, a strip of land between Manhattan and Queens, holds upon it a rotting corpse of a building, the remains of a pre-Civil War smallpox hospital.
Huh.
The perfect setting for the fateful encounter the production called Spidey and Goblin Square Off.
Interesting. So yes, they end up in this abandoned smallpox hospital, and as we've seen before, the Goblin is devastatingly effective at hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
He just mops the floor with Peter. I mean, Peter cannot get a punch in edgewise. He is just being overwhelmed in every possible way. And we see Spider-Man, he's flung through brick walls. He just takes a lot of abuse. His suit is damaged. It's ripped. His face is poking out. I mean, you can clearly see Peter Parker's face there, which I feel like is almost symbolic too, in that this is not just the Spider-Man versus Goblin anymore. This is now Norman Osborn versus Peter Parker and Spider-Man versus Goblin.
That's a great point. It's all merging into one.
So it's all on the table at this point.
Yeah.
Between Norman/Goblin versus Peter/Spider-Man. And for the longest time, Norman has the upper hand. He just completely dominates the fight. And
Misery, misery, misery.
that's what you've
You've
chosen.
chosen.
And it looks like he has Peter on the ropes. It looks like he's about to land that knockout punch. But as a lot of villains are wont to do,
He starts monologuing.
exactly, he begins to gloat and he begins to tell Spider-Man all of the wonderfully evil things he plans to do. And of course, the one thing that sets off Spider-Man is he tells Spider-Man, if you didn't intervene, Mary Jane's death would have been quick and painless. But now I'm going to torture her nice and slow.
Yeah, crap.
And then he pulls out the trident and says, MJ and I, we're going to have a hell of a time.
At this point, for no good reason, really, because once Peter's dead, that's all he really cared about.
Yeah.
But at this point, he's just being evil for the sake of being evil. He's going whole hog on this whole evil thing.
And not only that, but it's interesting in that, like we mentioned, that it's merging into one, that it's not the alter egos, it's both Peter and Norman fighting each other at this point.
Yeah.
We see that his yellow eyelids are up, so you can actually see it's Norman's eyes there. It's not the yellow eyes of the Goblin shield or the mask. It's actually Norman's eyes as he makes that threat to Mary Jane.
Yeah. Well, interesting, too, that Norman has the absolute guts to call out Peter for his selfishness. If he had not been so selfish, your little girlfriend's death would have been quick and painless. Norman is selfishness incarnate.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what he sees as selfishness. Peter wants to have it all, in a sense. Peter will soon realize he can't. That's the ending of the movie. He realizes he can't. But in that struggle to, what Norman sees as Peter trying to have it all, Peter's just trying to help as many people as he can.
Mm-hmm.
In Norman's eyes, somehow that equates to selfishness.
Exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. But you're right. He does call him out on that. And then, Norman's little spiel there about going off and harming Mary Jane is just enough for Peter to get a heroic second wind.
Yeah. Which, on the one hand, is inspired by after Gwen Stacy's killed in the comics,
Mm-hmm.
Peter beats the ever-living daylights out of the Goblin. He finds the strength to just clobber him to near to death. It also, in a sense, is another sort of refutation of the Goblin's ideology of, being only for yourself. Why care about others? In this moment, it's his care for MJ that gives him the strength to find that reserve of energy and fight back. MJ's been, a constant source of inspiration for him every step of the way through this movie, from his inception to him going to that wrestling arena and finally in his final confrontation against the Goblin. And that's an inner strength that Norman would never understand. The power that comes from caring for others and trying to do the best you can for the sake of others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so Peter is able to finally muster up the strength to fight back against the Goblin, and he seems to gain the upper hand. He's landing some blows. He's really giving it all he's got to the Green Goblin there, and he's able to kind of turn the tide. And now it's the Goblin who's on the defensive, and he pulls down a whole brick wall that crushes the Green Goblin, and we see his hand kind of emerge like a zombie rising out of the grave.
You're very Evil Dead.
Exactly. And Peter is finally about to finish him off with that one final knockout punch to the face, and the Green Goblin decides to change tactics and go for a bit more of a psychological touch. He takes his mask off and begins to say, Stop, it's me, it's Mr. Osborn. Like, please don't hurt me anymore. Like, it's me. It's your father figure. And Peter is understandably stunned by this, and he finally realizes everything. You can see like his jaw dropping as he suddenly puts it all together and says like, well, Mr. Osborn, how could you do this? You killed those people at the fair. Like how? And like you said, Norman does not take responsibility here, and he tries to brush it off as, it was the Goblin. He did it. I had nothing to do with it. Don't let him take me. Please help me. Mm-hmm. I'm the victim here.
I believe to a certain extent he did want to put the blame on the Goblin just to keep his own conscience clean and his own hands clean, which the Goblin seems to reinforce by saying, I'm here to do what you can't, to say the things you won't. Mm-hmm. So he seems to like that, but by this moment, it's abundantly clear, if it wasn't clear already, which it was, that maybe this is a part of him he doesn't like, but he's actively letting it go because he's got his finger on the button, ready to fire that glider at the first opportunity he gets, if he doesn't hear the right thing from Peter.
Because this was all just a delay tactic. In addition to the psychological manipulation, he was just trying to buy time to get his glider in there so he could impale Peter and kill him that way. But then finally he says to Spider-Man and Peter, he says, I've been a father to you. Be a son to me now. And then Peter finally sorts out this battle within himself, at least for the time being, this battle over who is his father figure, and proudly says, after everything, that I had a father, his name was Ben Parker. And of course, the Goblin is a little bit offended by this. So then he just says, fine, Godspeed. I'm going to kill you now. And presses the button to have his glider come forth and sprint towards Spider-Man with its prongs extended, or with its bayonet extended, I should say. And I don't think he knew about Spider-Man's spider sense, because he seems to be surprised that Spider-Man's reflexes allowed him to get out of the way in time.
Yeah. The cunning warrior probably could have done a little bit better to study Peter's abilities a little bit more first.
Exactly, because he seems to be surprised by his little blunt reaction of, oh. Like, oh crap, well, I didn't think this one through. And it's he himself who is pinned against the wall there in an evidently fatal blow.
I really don't know what his plan was, though. Like, so the glider hits Peter. I mean, isn't Peter's body in the glider also just going to ram into him?
I guess maybe he thought that he would have enough time to get out of the way so that it would be Peter that is pinned to the wall instead of him. I don't know.
Maybe.
Like, tactically, that might have been a bit of a blunder, but certainly, I think he figured that Peter would stop the glider before it got to him. I'll bet you he wasn't expecting it on also hitting him.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And so his one final request, his last request before he dies, is that Peter does not tell Harry about everything. I guess most importantly, that don't tell Harry that I was the Goblin, but I guess also just about all of the Goblin stuff, about everything.
And I wonder why. I kind of wonder why.
I don't know, but
if I may wax poetically for a moment, I'm just...
Sure.
And so do the proud men die, crucified, not on a cross of gold, but on a stake of humble tin. That's the text. That's the narration from when this moment happens in the comics.
Huh. Interesting.
Amazing Spider-Man number 122. Yeah, Jerry Conway, the writer on that issue.
Huh.
Again, like I said, with the religious imagery, which is pretty fitting here for all the religious imagery and allusions that the Goblin has made throughout this story.
Absolutely. When you look at the scene of where Peter is laying Norman's body on the couch or the bed in the mansion there, it kind of reminds me almost of one of the Stations of the Cross, which is where they lay Jesus's body in the tomb there. So I don't know if there's anything to that, but just kind of an interesting
bit of imagery. Yeah. Please continue. I just wanted to chime in with that.
Oh, so let's see. So the Goblin is dead. Peter has brought him back to the Osborn mansion. Harry walks in on this very distressing scene, but the time of night and the room is dark. He can't tell that it's Peter Parker in that Spider-Man costume, but he knows that it's Spider-Man. And Harry demands, "What have you done?" He pulls a gun on him, but by the time he can get the gun out of the drawer, Spider-Man is long gone. Next thing we know, it's the day of Norman's funeral, and we're at the cemetery. And Peter and Harry, interestingly, in addition to the other things they had in common as being outsiders, now they have this thing in common of that they both lost their fathers through a very violent, tragic sort of event. Using this as a basis, Peter tries to console Harry and let him know that I know what it's like to lose a father. But Harry says, I didn't lose him. He was stolen from me. I swear on my father's grave, Spider-Man will pay. And so he swears vengeance against Spider-Man, who he blames for murdering his father. And at this point, Harry doesn't know that his father is the Goblin. For all he knows, his father was just an innocent victim of Spider-Man's murderous rage. I don't know. I don't think Harry knows why his father died. He just knows that his father is dead and Spider-Man is connected to it. And that's all he needs. That's all he needs to go on to set up 2 movies worth of a quest for vengeance.
And it's just a complete coincidence that all the Green Goblin attacks stopped right after his father died.
Well, I was about to say, too, realistically, if you found a body like that, it would be definitely investigated by the police and by the coroner to try to determine what the cause of death was. And certainly, I feel like it would have been in the news that there was a showdown.
Well, I have to wonder if maybe they paid it off or something, I mean, because Bernard obviously knows, as we find out later.
True.
He cleaned the wound. Maybe he arranged it so that there wasn't an investigation or somehow paid somebody off so that this didn't leak into the media.
That's possible.
Out of his love for the Osborn family.
Well, it's possible because, that he was a hardworking businessman, and it's not unknown for hardworking businessmen to die young of stress, heart attacks.
At the same time, though, I'm sure Harry would have gladly leaked to the media that Spider-Man killed his father and he wants him dead.
Yeah.
Maybe the details were kept quiet, but I'm sure probably it's common knowledge that Spider-Man killed Norman Osborn.
Exactly. And we don't know all of those connections, but certainly you're right. I feel like somebody would have had to notice that after Norman Osborn's death, all of these Green Goblin incidents suddenly stop. I feel like in real life, again, it would have been discovered much earlier that Norman was clearly behind the heist of the glider and the flight suit from Oscorp, and that he was the one responsible for the murder of the people at the Unity Day festival.
Yeah, we really don't see anybody like investigating
Well,
this rash of murders.
that's what I'm saying, because if you think about it, it's like a multi-billion-dollar military contractor with top secret hardware under development, top secret weaponry, very dangerous weaponry. You think that somebody would have looked a little bit more into why, like, how did it get stolen? Like, we have that woman who rushes into the Osborn mansion and tells him Dr. Strom's been murdered and our glider and flight suit have been stolen. But that's all we hear about it. Like, there would have been somebody that would have made the connection that the board members recently voted to fire Norman Osborn. The board members are now dead. The flight suit and glider have been stolen. Norman would have had access to them as one of the lead scientists on the project. It's not at all unreasonable to think that Norman Osborn is involved in this somehow. So I feel like he would have come under suspicion anyway.
Yeah, I mean, what, do they think it was a coincidence? So many good things all happening for him.
To you, all for you, your greatest creation.
Fair point, fair point. But again, that's probably why the police need Spidey out there.
That's true. They're not quite New York's finest in this universe.
Apparently not. Took him what? How many years to figure out who murdered Uncle Ben?
Exactly. So,
So that brings us to the end of the movie.
yes, I was going to say, so that's the last we see of him in the first movie.
And there's just an interesting visual bit that happens after Norman's died. We see Norman crucified in a sense, and then we cut back to Peter watching him, and just this image of the mask like floats up through the screen and dissipates. Now, it could be just a flair that Raimi has, something he wanted to do. I don't know. To me, in my subjective interpretation of this piece of art, and this might go along something with like the devilish motif of it all, but it almost seems like some sort of like an exorcism kind of thing to me.
Interesting.
The mask of the goblin has been freed, has been let go, released from this.
Only for it to be released and set upon a new host, who turns out to be Harry Osborn, who picks up where his father left off.
Yeah, as we see in the next couple movies, yeah. So Norman, not quite finished yet. And now, talking about the connection between Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn and this legacy, the legacy of the Goblin, as we know, like you said, the specter of Norman, it hangs over the whole series, and, especially Harry, and Harry will ultimately take up the mantle at some point. But interestingly enough, like the final confrontation between Peter and Norman, Norman says, thank God for you, give me your hand. And then just very shortly later, Harry sort of echoes that when he says, thank God for you, Peter. You're the only family I have. So
Yeah, absolutely.
an interesting sort of like verbal connection between the two, the thank God for you phrase, sort of reinforcing the one has now passed on to the other.
Huh.
And, we all know as an audience, there's going to be a reckoning at some point.
Absolutely there is. So it's interesting because in the second movie, Harry, when he's having this hallucination of his father, he sees his father in the mirror and they're having this conversation, or this imagined conversation. He angrily throws a knife at the mirror, smashes it, and then he sees that there's this secret room in the house there with all of this goblin equipment, with vials and vials and vials of the human performance enhancer serum. And Harry is just discovering this for the first time. So evidently at some point, Norman turned this room in his house into a goblin lair with all of this technology, all of this.
He's got a well-stocked arsenal.
He does. A lot of bombs, gliders, everything's in there. Again, more vials of the, enhancer serum. I mean, maybe you have to take that serum every so often to keep the effects of it. I don't know. They don't really tell you that, but why else would he have all of these vials of it?
I don't know.
Unless he intended to create more goblins? I mean,
he is concerned with, his legacy and his heirs. Perhaps he was preparing something for the future. For future goblins.
Could be. He was grooming an heir, maybe. I don't know. Maybe he intended after killing Spider-Man to find a new apprentice.
I don't know.
Certainly wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah. But you figure he had to keep that stuff somewhere, so it makes sense that, like, where was the goblin glider the whole time in his suit? You gotta put that somewhere. You can't just leave that out in the open. That's gonna be a little suspicious. There it was.
It was in a secret room in his house.
It makes sense.
So anyway, as we said, the specter of Norman looms large, and Harry goes on his missions in Spider-Man 2 and 3, largely motivated by this desire to live up to his deceased father. Again, his presence looms large. It motivates other characters in the subsequent movies to act in a number of ways.
Yeah, so arguably the arch-villain of the entire saga.
Exactly. The confrontation between Spider-Man and Goblin is the pivotal showdown of the entire trilogy. And that's why we've spent so much time talking about them. It's just so important to understanding these movies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In other words, great choice for the first villain.
Absolutely. I don't think they could have done it any better. There's just a lot you can say about the Green Goblin. And again, that's why I think he's such a great choice for the villain in the first movie, because let's face it, the first movie kind of sets everything up. And this choice of villain just was the perfect setup for the whole series, because his shadow, his specter, his ghost, his spirit is undeniably there in both the second and third movies. And the conclusion of the third movie rests in large part on untangling this knot of all of these different feelings that everybody has about Norman Osborn. The other movies just can't happen without this component of Norman Osborn. They just can't.
Yeah, you're right. He's a fascinating character, complex character, comic booky as all get out, but very interesting. And, 40,000 years of discussion, and we've barely even tapped the vastness of Norman Osborn analysis.
Exactly. And everything he says is so darn quotable. I mean, come on.
Can't deny that either.
Back to formula?
Delivered. I can't imagine anyone doing a better job than Willem Dafoe. I mean,
no,
perfectly.
I think that was the perfect choice in casting there. I mean, he does a brilliant job, definitely.
I know Willem Dafoe has mentioned too, he sort of credits his experience in theater with sort of like the ability to portray acting in a very physical way. Because he said in theater, you're not exactly necessarily bound by like realistic body movements. Things are a little bit more exaggerated on the stage. And he let some of that come through with the Goblin.
Interesting.
Time and again, I've heard people praise him for just his commitment to the physicality of the part. Because you figure when he's in that suit, it could be anybody. But any time that he could do it, any time that they would let him do it instead of a stuntman, he wanted to be the person in that suit. He wanted to be the person on that glider. Even when they were doing shots that didn't need him to be there, they could have gotten a double, because maybe they're just doing his hand, maybe they're just doing his arm. His face isn't even there, so some actors might allow someone else to do it. He wanted to do those because he wanted every movement to be purely Goblin. So credit to Willem Dafoe, absolutely.
I agree 100%.
Huge part, along with the writing and direction, in every other aspect of the production. The design, the score. Everything came together for such an unforgettable villain.
No, I agree 100%. I think we've said a lot. I mean, there's so much more we could say, but I'm sure everybody out there has a lot of interesting things to say about the Green Goblin and these different aspects of his character and the background of his development, his rise, his alter ego, Norman Osborn, what propels him forward, what makes him do the things he does, what makes him do these things at Oscorp. I mean, there's just so many things you could talk about. And as we've said, we've barely even scratched the surface. I mean, there's just so much. But that's what makes these movies so great, and that we can just talk for hours and hours about these things.
We could talk for hours and hours, but at some point, some sadistic lunatic is going to come along and force you to make a decision where no matter what you do, the outcome is a brief and humorously nonsensical discussion. And I am that lunatic right now, and I am forcing you to make that decision. What's it going to be, Sean Merritt? Would you rather have a pack of ravening wolves snarling after your trust fund, or have all your promises come in the form of crackers? We are who we choose to be. Now choose, Sean. If promises were crackers, my daughter would be fat. Mr. Ditkovich.
So basically, it's a question of would I rather be rich but have somebody, go after my money, or would I rather be, good-natured but poor and unable to follow through on my promises to pay people?
You know what, Sean? I don't think so. I think I literally mean if you make a promise to someone, it means you have to give them a cracker. That's what I mean here. When someone makes you a promise, they've made you a cracker.
You're being very literal with it.
I'm being exceedingly, surreally literal.
I mean, honestly, I got to go with the Osborns again and pick the trust fund because because you know what? I want the money. Yeah,
but you've got a pack of ravening wolves snarling after it.
Oh, okay. So we're being literal with that too. That it is actual wolves from the wilderness that are snarling and have foam coming out of their mouths. They are hungry for my money for some reason.
You're painting an accurate picture. I am being exceedingly nonsensically literal.
Yeah. Okay, I'm in that case definitely the crackers because I am not. Okay, I no snarling dogs. No thanks. That's no amount of money is worth that.
Okay, okay.
Now, okay, Peter. Now here's your sadistic choice.
All right.
Would you rather be a guest at the Thanksgiving dinner at Peter and Harry's apartment and have to sit through all of the awkward conversation, or would you rather be an attendee at the Oscorp board meeting, perhaps one of the board members or one of their assistants or somebody else there, and again have to sit through the incredibly tense and awkward moments?
Jeez. Do I have to be a board member?
No, you can be like an assistant. You could be a secretary.
Maybe I'm an assistant. Yeah, maybe I'm a secretary. Okay, so I might avoid incurring his wrath.
You're not on Norman's side per se. You're not Norman's assistant. You're one of the board members' assistants, and so Norman might very well see you as, guilty by association.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so right there in the thick of it.
So,
jeez.
Yeah. You can't just be a neutral fly on the wall for that meeting.
Well, I mean, I know what happens to those board members, and I don't.
Well, to be fair, we know what happens to a couple of them. We don't know if all of them are murdered. I mean, it seems like they imply that, but they don't.
That is fair. That's a fair point. In any case, it's a precarious position to be in, as is the Thanksgiving meal. It is pretty tense. They're both pretty tense. However,
you got to sit there and be a party to all of the awkwardness, and also at that meeting, as we know, Norman finds out that Peter's Spider-Man there, and he marks Mary Jane and Aunt May to get to his heart.
That's true. And once again, if I'm there, I'm guilty by association again.
Yep, that's what I mean.
Man.
So that's basically the choice. Like if you're, no matter which one you're at, Norman has his target set on you. So,
dang.
Yeah.
This game is just making us very. I mean, we're getting a little too into character here. We're getting pretty sadistic about these questions here.
It's kind of fun though. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's the fun. It's like coming up with these very awful situations where, no matter what you pick, you're trying to pick the lesser of two evils, I guess. But that's the fun.
Yeah. I guess Norman knew how to have fun. Well, you know what? I think at the end of the day, the food at the apartment looked pretty good. I think Aunt May really knows how to put together.
But I will say, I think I know what you're going to say, and I just wanted to point out though that if you choose the board meeting, there might be safety in numbers there because your chances of blending into the crowd are a little bit better if you pick the board meeting.
You're right. Maybe I was like getting cotton candy at the Unity Day Festival or something, and I wasn't on the balcony.
But then again, we don't know.
Well, I mean, I think it. Both situations are pretty precarious. I think I just have to go with the one that. I mean, at least I get the food. I mean, that seems pretty fair. Shallow, but like.
No, I love Thanksgiving dinner.
Norman Rockwell-esque. It looks pretty good.
Yeah.
I think I can imagine me sitting there. And then all the awkwardness happens.
Yeah.
The Osborn storm away. MJ storms away. I'm just sitting there like, well, let's eat. So I think that's when it's going to be.
No, okay. I think
all
that's...
Right, what would you do? Is that... It sounds like you would go with the be at the board meeting.
I don't know. That's a tough choice. I mean, because, Thanksgiving dinner is almost always an awkward thing no matter where you go, even if you're not dealing with sadistic lunatic. But it would be very tough to be in that meeting because Norman gets very emotional, and I would have but then again, if I were on the board, I might try to be that guy who does the 12 Angry Men thing and say, you know what, maybe we're being a bit too hasty here. Maybe we should reconsider if we have to merge about these terms of the merger with Quest Aerospace. Like maybe I could try to curry Norman's favor standing up for him at the board meeting. But then again, so even if I'm outvoted, would I still be targeted by him? I don't know.
Interesting. I don't know. I mean, Norman seems to care a lot about loyalty, so maybe if you stood by him, who knows? Maybe you'd be the little Goblin Jr.
I guess I'd have to pick the board meeting because I'm sorry, but there's few things more. I feel like awkwardness is awkwardness, but I feel like it's even worse if it's with your family and friends at Thanksgiving dinner than it is at work. Because I feel like at least at work, you don't really know any of them that well, and you don't have to go home with them, and it's you can kind of write it off as, oh, that's just work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel a little shallow, but if I could die in either situation, the Thanksgiving meal looks pretty good. What can I say?
I totally understand. A home cooked Thanksgiving meal, that sounds pretty good. Aunt May knows what she's doing. She says very sternly that we are going to do things properly, and I assume that means the meal with all the fixings is pretty darn good.
I would think so. Man, I'm hungry now. That's probably the most sadistic part of this. Now I'm just sitting here hungry. Well, we're at the end of the episode now, so that's good. I can go grab something to eat.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for joining us for these observations from the Oscorp Oracle.
We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
Please feel free to swing on by Twitter at SMTT Podcast, as in So Much to Tell Podcast.
But until next time,
Godspeed, Spider fans.
excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, that's fun. I like coming up with these questions.